Breaking news, new reports just into the Situation Room that Russia is accusing Ukraine of attacking one of President Vladimir Putin's residences overnight. It's a claim that the Ukrainian President Zelensky strongly denies. CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen is joining us right now. Fred, you've spent a lot of time reporting from Moscow. What do you make of this accusation?
Yeah, it came from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Wolf, I would say about an hour, maybe a little bit more before or ago. And this was a press conference from Sergei Lavrov with some audio where he accused the Ukrainians of attacking a residence of Vladimir Putin in the Novgorod region, which is fairly close to Moscow. Now, the Russians are saying that 91 UAVs, drones, were used in this attack, that these drones were shot down, and that there are no reports of casualties. Now, the Russians, of course, irate about all of this. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, Wolf, coming out and saying that the Russians are going to have to rethink their negotiating position, accusing the Ukrainians of terrorism. And the Ukrainians themselves, by the way, also very quick to react to all of this. In fact, Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, denying that the Ukrainians attacked this residence, claiming that the Russians are trying to stoke discord between the United States and Ukraine. Of course, right after that very important meeting took place between Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago yesterday. So the Ukrainians unequivocally saying that they did not attack Vladimir Putin's residence, whereas the Russians are saying that this did happen, that they are going to rethink their negotiating position vis-a-vis the Ukrainians and trying to end the conflict in Ukraine because of this attack, Wolf.
So are they any closer at all right now to a deal to end this war?
Well, we just heard a couple of minutes ago, Wolf, that apparently President Trump just finished a phone call with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. We are still waiting to get some sort of readout from that, from the Russian side and from the U.S. side as well. One of the senior envoys of the Russians, Kirill Dmitriev, called these talks vital for peace, but it's unclear how much closer the sides really are to reaching some sort of agreement. One of the things that Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said is he said that more than 90% of the sticking points, he believes, have been sorted out, but that there are still two key issues that have not been sorted out. One of them is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, one of the biggest power plants, nuclear power plants in the world, currently held by Russia, but the Ukrainians obviously saying that this is their power plant, and what to do with that is still being sorted out. But the main issue remains the issue of territories, and if and what territories the Ukrainians would have to cede to the Russians as part of any peace agreement. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukraine's president, saying a referendum would be necessary in order to do that. However, he also says that for a referendum to happen, they need a 60-day ceasefire. The Russians are saying that is absolutely not going to happen. They believe that the Ukrainians are going to regroup, so it's going to be very interesting to see what President Trump and Vladimir Putin spoke about in that phone call and whether or not any headway was made in that regard, Wolf.
All right, Fred Pleitgen reporting for us. Fred, thank you very much.
I want to just get your take on something that Fred Pleitgen, our reporter on the ground there in Berlin, mentioned. This idea that the Ukrainians believe that this is Russia's attempt to sow discord between the US and Ukraine. Also, they're using it as a pretense, potentially, for more attacks. And then also another pretense to get out of this potential peace plan. What's your take on that? Is this sort of a ruse, an excuse by Russia to try to wriggle out of this peace deal?
I think that's very possible, Zaid, and I think Fred's exactly right. These are, certain ways in which Russia has done this in the past. They try to create a situation where they will take an incident that may or may not have been a direct attack on the residence of Vladimir Putin, one of the residences of Vladimir Putin in the Novgorod region, and make it a bigger thing than it actually is. It could be that there was an errant drone that went there instead of to its intended target. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that it was a false flag operation, at least that part of it, that the Russians were using that, and they may have decided to go after, make it seem as if there was a Ukrainian drone, but it was really one of their own that they then shot down conveniently. But there are a lot of different things that we don't know yet, so there's obviously some degree of speculation here, Zane, but I would definitely say that the Russians have had the tendency in the past to try to wiggle out of these negotiations. They believe they have the military military advantage right now, and they're going to do whatever they can to prosecute that advantage to, in essence, gain more territory in Ukraine, to gain a more advantageous negotiating position. Those are the kinds of things that they're seeking, and they think that they can do that, especially during these winter months.
Assuming that this peace plan hasn't completely derailed based on this latest lines that we're just getting here, Zelensky is talking about the fact that he's actually willing to bring up this plan for a referendum, assuming that there can be some kind of 60-day temporary ceasefire. If he puts forward a proposal to the Ukrainian people about potentially giving up land concessions to Russia, which way is that likely to go?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I haven't seen any polling figures, but I know that a lot of Ukrainians are looking at this as, they don't want to exchange land for peace. Now, some do, so this may be a fairly close-run thing if they think that they can get peace and that they think they have adequate security guarantees to make that happen. But if they think that they don't have adequate security guarantees, if the Russians, let's say, attack in the middle of the election process, then it would probably tip the scales to a rejection of a plan like that. And so what President Zelensky can do, if, let's say, this plan is rejected, he can say, well, I gave it to my people, I gave it as a referendum, provided it to them, I put it forward for their consideration, and they rejected it. He is basically not a loser either way, whether if he wins that referendum or if the referendum is approved, he gets to win. If that referendum is on the losing side, he also says, well, I tried, I followed the Constitution of Ukraine, and this is where we are right now. But there are certain consequences, of course, to each of those actions, and especially if the referendum were to be rejected, then what that would mean, Zane, is that it would be, probably a continuation of the conflict as we know it right now. So more war of attrition, more, stalemates on the front, basically.
We're being told that both sides are closer to peace than they've ever been, but there are still a lot of headwinds that remain, not to mention obviously the issue with land concessions if there is some kind of referendum, but also what happens with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. And then on top of that, you throw into mix the latest accusations by Russia about Ukraine potentially attacking one of Putin's residences. We'll see what happens. Colonel Cedric Layton, live for us there. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Well, let's go straight to our Elena Treen joining us live now from Washington. So Elena, just walk us through what we know about this phone call between Vladimir Putin and President Trump, especially in light of the allegations that Moscow is saying that Ukraine has tried to attack, or rather attacked, one of Putin's residences. And what does that do to the peace talks here?
Yeah, I mean, it already, Zane, puts these very fragile peace talks in a more precarious position. We don't have much details from the call this morning between the president and Russian President Vladimir Putin. All I was able to get from the White House was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told me that the president just moments ago wrapped up that call with Putin and that essentially it was a positive call concerning Ukraine. Now, of course, we know that the goal of this call was to walk Putin through what President Trump had discussed with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday during that more than 3-hour-long meeting at his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. But look, this is very much a wait-and-see kind of process. This is what I'm continuing to hear in my conversations with people, behind the scenes who are working on this peace proposal. I will say we did hear kind of optimistic rhetoric from President Trump yesterday after they emerged, like I said, from that 3-hour-long meeting. He saying that he believes they are closer now to a deal than they have ever been. We also heard from Zelensky. He said this prior to the meeting, but also after the meeting, that he believes that at least on the U.S. side, the U.S. and the Ukrainians have agreed to roughly 90% of the terms in this proposed 20-point peace plan. But it really is that remaining 10% that is the thorniest. In addition to what Russia is now accusing Ukraine of, we also know that there's a lot of questions over security guarantees. We heard Zelensky say yesterday that he believes the U.S. is now agreeing or going to agree to a 15-year security guarantee for Ukraine in a potential deal. But also this idea of land concessions. Will they be willing, both sides, to remove troops from the Donbas region. It's very unclear. You know, Zelensky seemed to signal he might be open to that, and then he said that yesterday. And then today we've seen Zelensky actually posting repeatedly on social media, on X, saying that he doesn't believe that Russia is really, you know, willing to do that. And then another big question as well is what will happen to a key Ukrainian nuclear facility. We'll have to see where these talks lead. All I know as well is that more conversations are going to be happening over the next several weeks. The president said potentially you could see more talks happening in Washington, but there's still a long way to go after that meeting, Zane.